Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful evening, isn't it? Gorgeous Friday night, end of Passover, so, almost May. Anyway, and now we have Doug Preston with us. It's been a busy day for Doug. He signed 2,500 books in the back room. You guys, in case you think he came just for you, forget it. Didn't work out that way. So we started. Did you notice all the shipping materials out there? That's where all those books are going. Great.
That's right. Well, thank you for coming. It's a nice, intimate group tonight. You're really loyal readers. I thank you and congratulate you on your literary taste.
Exactly. So we have time to talk about all kinds of things tonight. And one of the things we should talk about is this new edition of Relic. So why don't you tell us a bit about the history of Relic, because it's a brand new look.
Yeah, this was, this of course was the first book that Lincoln and I wrote together. And you may have heard the story, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Lincoln was the editor for my first book. And that book was called Dinosaurs in the Attic. And it was a history of the Museum of Natural History. And after that book was published, he was an editor at St. Martin's Press. He said to me, I want you to give me a tour of the museum. And I thought, well, instead of a boring old tour during the day, I'll give him a tour after the museum is closed at night, because, of course, I worked at the museum. So and I wasn't really supposed to do this, but I did. And we wandered around the dark museum with all the lights out except for the emergency strip lighting. And we ended up in the hall of Cretaceous dinosaurs. And Link turned to me and he said, "Oh, my God, this is the scariest building in the world. We have got to write a thriller set in this building." And I said, "Lincoln, I mean, that's fine. But I don't know how to write a thriller." He said, "Well, I do. He said two things. He said, "Well, I'm working on a novel right now, editing a novel right now at St. Martin's Press. It's called The Silence of the Lambs. And it's really good. I think I'm learning quite a bit from working on this novel." But then, as sort of a little coda to this story, as we were talking in the hall and our voices were going up a notch, we suddenly heard a voice from the doorway of the hall. This guard was standing in the door, and he was sort of outlined in the light behind him, and he had a flashlight, and he was like, "Who is that? Who's there? Who's talking? Who is that?" And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. And Lincoln said, "Let me handle this." And he said, "Oh, thank God you've come. We've been lost. How do we get out of this museum?" And the guard said, "But it's 2:00 in the morning. The museum closed at 5. Don't we know it? Oh, my God, we've been wandering around. How do you get out of this place?" And the guard was completely taken in and brought us out through security because, of course, the doors of the museum were locked up tight. He never asked for ID or anything. So I thought, this guy is going to be a good partner. But we were only going to write one book, and it was just Relic. It was just for fun. And we wrote it together, and I had such a good time writing it, and Lincoln did too. And then it was a bestseller, and they made it into a movie. Who here has seen the movie? What did you think? If you like, yeah.
How long ago was the movie?
It was 1997.
Wow, so it's one of those Ted Turner oldies by now.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's become a classic. It's become sort of a kind of a classic.
Yeah, think what they could do now with CGI and all the rest. If you could have much more exciting stuff on the screen.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, Stan Winston designed the monster. He was he did the dinosaurs and for Jurassic Park and so forth. And he made 7 models. Some of them could move, some of them didn't move. Some were smaller than others. I don't know quite. But I got a chance to see one of those models. It's amazing. It's just incredible. It wasn't anything like the monster I imagined. Nothing, but it was pretty scary.
So did you imagine when you were standing there looking at the dinosaurs and all these extinct creatures with Lincoln that science would come along and create the possibility of de-extincting. I'm trying to get this verb right because de-extincting seems so ridiculous, but nonetheless, that is part of the science in extinction, which really could be called de-extinction. Did you even imagine it?
No, I thought it's never going to happen. I mean, the biotechnology required to de-extinct an animal at that time in the 90s was way beyond anything. I mean, Jurassic Park was truly, science fiction. Although Crichton did a wonderful job making it seem plausible, but DNA doesn't survive long. I mean, the oldest DNA ever recovered was, only couple of 100,000 years old. So, but now, with the discovery of the polymerase chain reaction, the PCR reaction, which won a surfer dude a Nobel Prize, and he just took his money and went back to surfing. They're able to do, that was the foundation for the ability to sequence the genome of human beings, of Neanderthals, of woolly mammoths, of all kinds of animals, extinct animals. And having sequenced the genome, then they discovered a new technique called CRISPR, which was also won a Nobel Prize from the Jennifer Doudna, who discovered that along with others, but she won a Nobel Prize for that. She went to school where I went to school at Pomona College in California. She's not a classmate though, but that allows, the first discovery was to be able to sequence these genomes in extreme detail, and CRISPR, this technology, allows the scientists to snip out a gene and put a new gene in. It allows actual very fine gene editing to be done. And we are on the verge of a biological revolution that is going to change our species. This is no joke. And what gave me the idea for Extinction was actually pursuing a nonfiction story for the New Yorker magazine about a company called Colossal Laboratories and Biosciences, founded by a geneticist from Harvard Medical School with funding from the Winklevoss twins, those who helped fund
they're
Facebook.
from the Facebook movie, aren't they? We all learned to hate the Winklevoss
well,
twins when we were watching. What was the name of that movie?
The Social Network.
That's it, right. I still remember that. They were well cast in that.
And then they went on and went into Bitcoin and made billions of dollars in Bitcoin. I mean, these guys, I don't know them personally, but they seem to have their finger in every pie and they've got a big finger in the de-extinction pie, which is the effort of this company, which is a for-profit company, to de-extinct the woolly mammoth and other Pleistocene megafauna, as well as.
To what purpose, Doug? What is the advantage to bringing back a woolly mammoth, which is going to be totally out of context?
Well, the real question is how are they going to make money from it? That's the question, because this is a for-profit company, and they're going to create a honest-to-God Jurassic Park. That's what they're going to do, and it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Some of us may be lucky enough to live to see it, to see actual woolly mammoths.
Okay, so it's kind of like if China won't let us keep pandas, which is, really tragic. Did you see the really sad picture? I think it was in the Wall Street Journal today. Might have been sad. Anyway, the little panda that had to be returned from Korea to China, and it's in isolation, and all the, Korean people are in tears, and panda diplomacy. Who knew? So maybe there'll be sort of like a woolly mammoth diplomacy, where you could lend one out to. Because I would imagine that, as you say, a Jurassic Park or a zoo is the only plausible place.
Well, you just actually touched on something interesting, because this company, Colossal, had a deal with Russia. And there's they were partnering with these Russian scientists who are doing the same thing, de-extincting the woolly mammoth, a group in Russia. And they'd acquired 800,000 acres of Siberian tundra, which is perfect habitat for the woolly mammoth. and they were going to turn their woolly mammoths loose on the Siberian
Oh,
tundra.
like repopulating the bison in the West,
Exactly.
sort of that thing?
Yeah, exactly. But Russia invaded Ukraine, and that fell through. So now Colossal is looking for another place for their woolly mammoths.
So, can these creatures actually reproduce? I mean, they've been, when they're created, are they actually able to go on and, mate with, if they make a male and a female, can they progress in the normal manner?
It seems unlikely because there are going to be a lot of errors in the genome that make, viability very iffy. And also it could lead to a lot of mutations. Monsters could be produced. Because the technique is they're going to get a fertilized egg that of a woolly mammoth that they're going to put into an Asian elephant, because the Asian elephant is the closest relative, and that will gestate, so that there'll be an Asian elephant that will have a woolly mammoth as a baby.
Wow. Well, will the Asian elephant mother really want to mother the woolly mammoth, or will she be completely confused? Well, I mean, it's a decent question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is. Of course, that's a question that they really can't answer until they do it. That may be a hurdle. Maybe the mother will reject the child. Oh my God, I've given birth to a freak. But what? Some of the things they're talking about is maybe they're going to create woolly mammoths without tusks, which I think is the worst idea, but because they're afraid of poaching. And woolly mammoths had these gigantic tusks.
Yeah, it'd be worse than the rhinoceros problem,
Right.
or the elephant.
Yeah, the woolly mammoth tusk is...
But on the other hand, can the woolly mammoth really survive if it doesn't have its tusks? What did they use their tusks for?
Well,
did they just fight with them, or did they use them to actually like scoop up food, or what?
They used them to tear down, trees, and actually, like in Africa, they use their tusks to actually, if they want to eat the leaves of a tree, instead of trying to reach up, they just rip the tree down and smash it, and eat the tree on the ground. They're very destructive eaters, and they have these giant molars that will grind up wood. I mean, they actually can eat, bark and wood, and they're.
Are they herbivores?
Yes, they're herbivores.
Oh, well, that's good news. Just, scary
But
right there.
one of the falsities of Jurassic Park was that somehow the herbivore dinosaurs were peaceful. The most dangerous animals in Africa are not the lions.
It's the hippo.
Yeah, the hippo, the Cape buffalo, and the elephant, all herbivores, and those are the most dangerous. So my novel postulates that instead of going to Siberia, they de-extinct the megafauna, some 6 species of megafauna, and they create a park in Colorado called the Erebus, in the Erebus Valley of Colorado. So 100,000 acres of cold, high altitude, ecology, which is what these animals like. It isn't just the woolly mammoth, but they've de-extincted the Irish elk, the giant ground sloth, Castoroides, the giant beaver, and the Indricothere, which was the largest land mammal that ever lived. Incredible. Indricothere. You've probably never heard of it. It's twice the size of the woolly mammoth. And it's an ancient, the ancestor of the rhinoceros, although it didn't have a horn. But it was absolutely huge, giant animal.
You mean the ground shook when it walked?
It did. It actually did.
That's a line from the book. I didn't make that up, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, the ground shook when it walked. I mean,
Yeah.
why that particular animal? What possible use would anybody have for an animal that size?
Well, if you charge people $10,000 to look at it, that's a good use. And that's what happens at Erebus. This is a resort created by a billionaire and with a company where they've de-extincted these animals. This is a very curated environment. They've removed the present-day species that might prey on them, because these animals are very expensive to create. The first woolly mammoth cost almost $100 million. So they don't want some mountain lion taking it down. So they've removed the mountain lions, the bears, and all the other dangerous animals from the park. And they've also altered the aggression in these animals because um, elephants are very dangerous. Who knows? The ground sloth could be very dangerous.
It's awake.
The Irish elk might, like moose in Maine, are very dangerous. So they've bred out the genes of aggression. As we humans turned the wolf into the dog. We turned this really dangerous pack animal into a friendly, floppy, tail-wagging animal. And that's what they've kind of done with the woolly mammoth and these others. They've removed these aggression genes so that it won't be a Jurassic Park. There are not going to be any, carnivorous T-Rexes roaming around and no electric fences. That people can go out there and enjoy these animals in their natural environment. And each animal is chipped. They know its location. It's got a video camera on it. So, they know where their animals are, and they know exactly what they're doing at all times. So,
Whereabouts in Colorado?
well, it's west of the Flat Tops Wilderness. It's actually a fictitious. What I did was I opened up an area of Colorado between Vail and the Flat Tops Wilderness and created 100,000 acres there that didn't exist.
Is it closer to the Flatirons in Boulder, or would it be?
It would be west of that.
It would be west of that.
West of that, yeah, exactly.
It's not a real place.
Yeah.
It's not a real place.
Oh,
No,
Well,
no,
it's
no, no, no. It's a made-up place,
okay.
but
Because
it's
I went to school in Boulder.
no. I get it, but
What is he talking about?
it's a fictitious part of Colorado, and it's interesting the way Doug has it. It's there's like a cirque, high mountains around it, and there's a lot of mining, and so part of this environment is there's old mining tunnels and old mining community and so forth. Well,
Right
yeah,
up by Golden.
not anywhere real.
Golden is a mining
Oh, maybe.
town. I went to school in Boulder and spent a lot of time, traveling around when we had time off. And Golden is a mining town.
Did Golden inspire you?
Yeah, it's very much like that. Colorado, those mountains in that area, Golden and so forth, are riddled with old gold and silver mines. And so what Erebus has done is that they've, to keep the environment looking pristine, they've put their labs and most of their infrastructure in these old mines so that you can't see it. But they did build a gorgeous lodge which is sort of based on treetops in Kenya. If you've heard of that, that's a famous old lodge that Queen Elizabeth used to go to, the European royalty. It's still there. And the famous thing about treetops was, have you been to treetops? No, you've been everywhere.
I know, but not to Kenya. I was in South Africa, and I was going to tell you an elephant story here in a little bit, but finish up.
Well, I was just going to say that the thing at treetops is that in the evening, it was built right next to a very famous watering hole, and in the evening, all the animals would come in, the elephants, and come in to drink, and everyone would go up to the observation deck at treetops with their martinis or whatever, their little glass of sherry, and watch the animals gather to drink. So at Erebus, it's the same thing. This gorgeous lodge built out of wood, with this beautiful observation deck that sort of is cantilevered out over this watering hole. And as the sun sets, or the giant elk and the woolly mammoths, including a little baby woolly mammoth named Tom Thumb, all come and drink at the water, and everyone is there with their martinis watching.
It's wonderful. My husband and daughter have been there, and they also went to, I'm trying to remember, it's the Serengeti Delta, and then there's something else. But I've only been to the South African ones.
Yeah.
So
They've been to Okavango, haven't
that's
they?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of the name, but exactly. So in case you're thinking about the elephants not really being dangerous because we're used to seeing them in the zoo, when we were in South Africa, we heard a lot of stories, but my favorite, sort of gruesome, was a young Chinese couple on their honeymoon, and they had a rental car, and they had cameras, as people tend to do. And they're driving along, and there was an elephant. So they stopped the car, got out of the car, decided to take photos. The elephants stomped him to death within, because elephants do that. They are, they are aggressive. They move very fast. But contrastingly, when the guide was driving us to Johannesburg to catch the train, the old-fashioned train back to, an elephant had broken out of the park fencing. And you think that the park fencing is there to protect the people, but it's actually there to protect the animals, because by the time they got to the village where the elephant had come out of the fencing, it had been reduced to nothing. The villagers had killed it and, skinned it and basically stored all.
Really?
Yep.
Oh
The
my
whole
God.
elephant, well, there was like a little piece. So it goes both ways, I mean, one elephant took out the Chinese tourists, and the other, the villagers took out the elephant, partly because they don't often have, enough to eat, enough protein, whatever.
Oh,
So,
that's a horrifying story.
well, they both are, but I mean, it is, big animals like that are really dangerous. Um,
Well, the woolly mammoth was driven to extinction by human beings.
yeah, it was like
Yeah.
the bison, right? Like the buffalo.
Exactly. And here, there used to be the Columbian mammoths used to wander all over Arizona.
Right.
And they were killed out when people arrived here, 30,000.
They were a huge
20,000
protein
years.
source, so it would make perfectly good sense. Have any of you gone to Yellowstone now that the bison have been reintroduced to Yellowstone? So that everybody thinks they're just, cuddly things you can watch. Forget it. They have skinned the trees. I mean, we were trying to figure out why all the trees look so, like from here down, they were all minus their bark and looked like
Yeah.
terrible things that happened to them, and it was the bison. And if they come towards you, everybody in the park says, don't get out of your car, don't. So Rob and I were driving along, and suddenly this giant bison came towards us. So we stopped and, kept the windows up, and he strolled up, looked at me through the window, took his picture through the window, and on he went. But, you don't want to get out, and it's not a zoo when they're out there in real life. And I think, unfortunately, many people are by now so accustomed to zoos or movies or whatever, they don't recognize that, it's a real situation.
Yeah, that it is funny. We're too far removed from nature.
Did you
Yeah.
see the people trying to shake the two grizzly cubs out of a tree to do something? It was an Instagram post the other day. It was a group of, yeah. And then I guess the park people came in to arrest them or something, because these little grizzly cubs were terrified. But I mean, imagine where if the mother had been there. Just imagine what would
God.
would have happened. I don't know,
Yeah.
where was mom? Do you know? Because yeah, but I mean, she would have absolutely destroyed. So I mean, it's just amazing to me that people are so naive about it or unaware or whatever.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe
It's-
video games have ruined all of us.
I think that's right. Yeah, but video games and just a lack of, appreciating the seriousness of nature.
Yeah.
It's not a.
So when you leave this book, one thing you will wish is that Erebus were a real place, because I'm telling you, the lodge, it's really wonderful. I kept thinking, Doug, this is like your dream, when I read it. I don't know that, I would have. I mean, it didn't have to have the de-extincted animals. I'd have been happy just to go to the lodge and watch, actual bison down in the plain. But you
Yeah.
made this lodge so real and so comfortable.
I really got into it.
Boy, I'll
I
say.
really visualized in my mind. I said, okay, if I were a billionaire building this lodge, how would I do it? Forget the steel and chrome and all that. It's going to be beautiful woods. It's going to have a sort of traditional look. I mean, there's big timbers inside with Navajo rugs and big stone fireplace but this
Sorry, there we go.
this but looking out over this beautiful sort of pond where the animals come, and yeah, I just had a lot of fun.
You really did. It feels so real that, you just want to stay there. The other character, my personal favorite in the entire book, is Tom Thumb, the little baby woolly mammoth. He's so cute. I was thinking of my puppy Scooter, who reminded me sort of this little woolly mammoth. But, you know, yeah, he's a great
and
character.
they are cute, actually. You know, when you put fur on an elephant with their big floppy ears, their furry ears, I mean, they look twice as cute. I mean, a little baby elephant is cute enough, but when you put fur on it, it's just to die for. It's so cute.
It's just swinging along, its little tail swinging, you know. Anyway, Tom Thumb is terrific. So, so what happens? There's a really bloody opening scene for this book. We think there's blood on the ground, but we don't actually know what's happening.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the novel opens with a scene of violence, and the local sheriff of Eagle County is called in, and he immediately realizes that this is something that's more serious than what he can handle in his group. So they bring in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, which is a real entity that is like the FBI, except it's for the state. And they've got all the forensic labs, they've got the DNA labs, they've got the fingerprinting, the databases, everything, just like the FBI, but it's just for Colorado. And in Arvada, Colorado is where they're kind of based, near Denver. But so an agent with the CBI named Frankie Cash, is assigned to the case. And they arrive at the scene of this terrific violence. Now, there was a honeymooning couple that were camped, and the bodies are gone. There are no bodies, but there are two huge pools of blood on the ground, and the forensic medical examiner who comes is able to determine that there's so much blood on the ground that these two people have to be dead, and that they're almost certainly decapitated because they exsanguinated so quickly.
It was the jugular vein, that, you know,
Right.
the fatal blow to the jugular that would do that.
Right, but where are the bodies? The bodies are gone. There's not even a blood trail, and they get bloodhounds up there to try to follow the trail, but they can't. For some reason, there's a reason, you know, that for some reason the bloodhounds lose the trail. Actually, they lose the trail because of in a mammoth area where the scent of the mammoth throws them off, and that's sort of the beginning.
It is the beginning. So you can learn a lot about mammoth excreta in this book because the mammoth have these big piles, and that's part of the reason the bloodhounds get. I mean, who knew? But if you look at their diet, I guess you have to assume that, you know, it went in, it has to come out. But
Yeah,
therefore,
I have a story about that. You know, when I was a kid, my parents took us to Africa, and we went and we lived with the Luo tribe, which was something crazy. That's actually the tribe that Obama's father was from, the Luo tribe in Kenya. They live in western Kenya along the shores of Lake Victoria, and they were considered by the British to be the educated tribe, so that they were put in charge of everything during the British colonial era. But anyway, so we were out in the bush, and we were on a game trail in this very dense bush. And my little brother, who was, I was 10, so he was 8, was walking ahead, and he stepped on something, and it gave way, and he went right down to his knees in elephant poop. And it was a gigantic elephant, you know, pile of dung that had sort of dried and hardened on the top, so it looked just like a rock. And so he went on the top and then broke through the crust and went down. And I remember him standing there crying and saying, "Why didn't someone tell me that this was elephant? You know, why didn't someone tell me?" We were like, "Well, we didn't know. We didn't know."
So you brought that into the story, and it's even grander with the mammoth and their tree diet. I mean, there we are, right? So, a lot of interesting things. So one of the other things about this book is that it is actually, it's not so much a love story, but there's sort of a courtship, because Frankie is a tough woman and the sheriff is his own guy, and it's interesting how they are forced to learn to work together. It's very scratchy and sort of traumatic. But the good news is that at the end, they are both, that's the only spoiler I'll give you. They're still standing, both of them. And it has provoked Doug into writing a sequel. So,
That's right.
yay!
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I'm going to do
know.
a
So
sequel.
that part's really, they're too good to leave behind.
I just love these characters.
No
And,
kidding.
and then in the beginning, they really get off on the wrong foot because they're up at, over 10,000 feet, where this, this double murder occurred. And so the sheriff is kind of a good old boy, you know, and so he offers, he's a gentleman, he offers Frank, he says, well, it's very high altitude. Would you like me to carry your pack for you? And Frankie says, oh, no, I wouldn't want to put an elderly gentleman at risk at high altitude for a cardiac infarction. So he's like, oops, all right, sorry. so they have this, she's kind of defensive and he's a little bit old-fashioned and she's not quite as old-fashioned. But they
There's
manage
a lot of
to-
jurisdictional disputes. That's one of the things whenever you have law enforcement, one of the things that adds tension to books is that the law enforcement people tend to bicker over their own territories. They're not unlike the animals. So that part is good. But you also have a very large cast of other law enforcement people that come in. You've
We-
got the guys with the dogs and, their
Yeah, the
drones. And
flying
there's
the drones.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of really advanced law enforcement going on.
There
or
really is.
Police procedural, but really at the cutting edge.
Is
And-
Colorado really up for all that, or did you make that up?
No, that's they're using.
They
that
really
stuff
do
now. They're
that?
using, like, at night they're flying infrared drones. Like if someone's lost, they give off a heat signal. You can fly a drone if it's cold air and it's, you can sometimes find people
Are they
that
looking
way.
for people like lost in the mountains and
Yeah,
stuff now with
exactly.
drones?
Yeah, they can do that, and the drones have, they have a visual wavelength and an infrared wavelength, and they put them together on the same screen so you can see the heat signature as well as what the visual signature is. It's very, these are really expensive and very powerful drones, and these kinds of drones are being used now in warfare. I mean, in Ukraine infrared drones flying at night is a very common thing.
They're going to be flying at us out of Tolleson, thanks to Amazon. But
Yeah.
as I understand it, they only have a 7-mile range, the Amazon drones that they're about to use to fly. I don't want a drone to arrive at my front porch. No. I know, it's really weird. but-
Drones, I mean, I have a drone and I fly it, and it makes a really irritating noise.
Yeah.
And
Do you know when we had our roof inspected the last time, because you ought to do that, the company that came, they flew drones over the roof rather than climbing up on ladders and looking for it. And I thought that was really smart.
Really, that's very
yeah,
interesting.
no, it was
Wow.
great. They mapped out the roof, and you could see from the drone where I don't remember, garbage from a tree that was
Yeah.
overhanging it. It clogged up, the gutter or whatever it was. It was really very good. And then they knew exactly where to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, but I think, if you see a drone flying around or over or around your property, it's really disturbing.
It is. We got chased by one in Stockholm. We were wandering along towards the Gamla town, or Gamla, whatever it is they call it, Stadt, in Stockholm, and there was a body of water, and we kept hearing this weird noise, so we looked up, and here's this big drone over our head, and some guys over on a peninsula sort of sticking out in the water were flying drones. Just thought they'd come down for a look, but I found it very unnerving.
Yeah, I have a neighbor. When I was flying my drone, he's a good friend, and I said, I'm not going to fly my drone anywhere near your place because I know what's going to happen if I do. And he said, yeah, you better know, because my shotgun is loaded and by the door. So, yeah.
So anyway, Erebus is very technologically equipped, the whole resort, the way they look after the animals, the way they run the resort. You had a lot of fun with that.
I did. It was really fun to imagine. I thought part of a main character in this novel is the resort itself, and how it runs and how well thought out everything was. They've really worked out all the kinks, and they've got an old ghost town in the historic ghost town in the resort, and they fixed it up, and they're now they're using it for as a movie set. And so part of the novel is that they're shooting a film in this ghost town. It's a cheesy Western. The plot is there's a time warp, and woolly mammoths are suddenly appear in the West, and a group of cowboys are able to wrangle the woolly mammoths and break them and ride them and take out the bad guys. So that's the plot of the movie, and so they've unfortunately things go awry with this film crew.
They are an important part of the story, right?
Yeah, they're very important. Yeah.
That's a big story. It's a complicated story. It's really loads of fun to read, and not slightly, actually horrifying. But, and you know what I was thinking, if any of you watched, oh, now I'm going blank. What was the Barbie Oppenheimer? It'll come. Sorry, I have these moments where I can't remember titles. You know that once people think up something, it's almost impossible not to actually make it, test it to actually try it. And that was a big thing with the bomb, was whether they, having devised the A-bomb, if they were really going to test it in New Mexico. And it's like once you let the scientific genie out of the bottle, the scientists just can hardly stand it if they don't see if it works.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, the history of science, just as you point out, is if it can be done, it will be done. It's never in the history of science have they refrained from doing something
Exactly.
that they could do. And we are now at the point where we can actually take over our evolution and direct it any way we want. And the thing is that your parents want their children to be more successful than they are. They want them to be taller and smarter and faster and better at sports. And this is where we're going. Where how are you going to stop people?
It's kind of a version, really, of Nazi eugenics when you really think about it, in a sense that they were trying to create a master race, and in a way. It's because it's going to cost a lot of money for that sort of thing to happen, that in fact we may be creating a privileged society.
Exactly, and it'll be privileged because it'll be very expensive.
Exactly.
So only the richest people will be able to afford it, and they will do it. Of course they're going to do it. How there's no way, and also there's some good things they can get rid of genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs or
they can do spina bifida now in utero and try to eliminate some really terrible things, and they're working on correcting a lot of birth defects before birth, so that they can save people from a lot of misery. So no, I think there's some great things about CRISPR, but you do have to ask yourself if we're looking towards sort of a super race that only wealthy people are going to be able to inhabit.
Well, that's right. I mean, the exact same technology being used to resurrect the woolly mammoth is the technology that will be used to manipulate your children. For a couple of $1 million, you can have a child who's going to be 3 inches taller, have a higher IQ, be faster, better at sports, more coordinated. I mean, whatever you want, there's going to be a list. You tick off what you want. I mean, we are really at the top of a cliff, and I don't know where we're heading because, even if we refrain from doing it here in this country, that they're going to be doing it in North Korea. They're going to do it in Russia.
There's some guy in China that's already done a sheep, if I remember right. I can't think of his name, but he's cloned a sheep. Yeah.
No, there was a guy in China who actually. Did a human genetically manipulated a human baby.
Oh, was it a baby?
For to get rid of a genetic defect, and the Chinese put him in prison. They said it was illegal. I mean, it's illegal to do that now, and the Chinese put him in prison.
Isn't there a sheep out there called Dolly?
Yeah, but that was done by us. We did that.
Ah, we did that.
We did
okay,
that.
all right.
Yeah, we can clone sheep. We can clone that we,
You
it's,
know, you can clone your dog. I mean, I was trying to remember. We looked into it because we were so attached to our one of our dogs, and it's like $50,000 or something. So ultimately,
yeah,
we didn't do that. But you can actually now try to. But you don't know what you'll get. That's the thing. You know, it
yeah,
sounds like you could just clone your dog and you'd have your same dog, but there's no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee that something won't. It only takes one little thing, you know,
yeah,
to
that's
alter
right.
it.
Yeah, and with Dolly, you know, there were, I think, 20 sheep for 15 fetuses that died or were freaks because before they got it right. So,
But there was a guy that developed some big, long, bighorn sheep. He did it illegally just recently. He was arrested for it.
oh, is that right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I know there was a story just out 2 months ago about it.
Yeah, interesting. I haven't seen that. I'll have to look that up because,
It made it really big, abnormally large, and then they were allowing people to come and hunt them.
oh, it's just like, you know, you can just imagine North Korea deciding they want to create a race of superhumans, right? I mean, that's just the kind of thing that those crazies over there would do. And they've got some really good scientists. I mean, they've got scientists who have built nuclear weapons and missiles that can reach our country. They're perfectly capable of doing this
And also,
biotechnology.
since you already mentioned it, you know, all that tundra in Siberia, you could imagine that they could be doing it as a hunt, you know, putting those animals out there and then charging people $100,000 to, you know, cross the tundra. I mean, there's guys in Texas that do something like that with animals. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's another possibility. It'd be creating them just so they could be hunted down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's another way to make money from this.
There are.
So,
Right.
yeah.
I like that sinister chuckle. I know. He says, right. So tell us a little bit about August, because Doug and Lincoln will have a book out August 13th, a new Pendergast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Angel of Vengeance. That's the third book in the trilogy that we've been writing. How many of you have read the first two books in the trilogy? Are you really frustrated that we ended the Cabinet of Dr. Lang?
Speak up. This
You
is your
wouldn't believe
chance.
that I got so much heat over that from my wife, from my friends, from my family. Everyone was like, what the hell? You know, I remember my wife was saying, I was 10 pages from the end and I kept thinking, how's he going to wrap this up? How's he going to wrap this up? And then I realized, God damn it, he's not going to wrap it up. So apologies. And I'm sorry to say that Angel of Vengeance also ends in a cliffhanger. Just kidding, just kidding. No, just kidding. Everything is wrapped up, absolutely done. Yeah.
So we have some other books up in front that you might not be aware of that Doug has been involved in. One of them is what's it called? Not the Lost Tomb, but the other one.
No,
No,
the one that's published by National Geographic.
it,
That's a
right.
beautiful book. What is the title? Oh my God, I can't remember.
looking at
It was a
them
couple
right
of
up
years
there, I
ago.
know.
But anyway,
Hello. But anyway,
it's the 100 Greatest Archaeological Discoveries.
yeah.
And it's a big fat book with beautiful photography in it. It's really interesting.
By the editor of National Geographic, but Doug wrote the preface.
Yes, and the Lost City of the Monkey God is one of those 100 greatest discoveries. So, yeah.
So we have copies of that, and then tell us a little bit about the Lost Tomb.
Well, the Lost Tomb is all these. It's 13 true stories, actual nonfiction stories, some of which became the basis for novels. For example, the Oak Island Treasure. How many of you are familiar with that? That's been on TV and everything. But so I went to Oak Island. I spent 2 weeks with the treasure hunters, those crazy people. I watched them work. I saw what they were doing. They showed me all the secret stuff that they'd found and everything else. And I wrote a story about it for the Smithsonian Magazine. And Lincoln read that story and he said to me, Doug, we could turn this into a novel. And that's what we did. And that became our novel, Riptide. And then I wrote a story for the New Yorker about, which some of you may have read because it's an Arizona subject, about Anasazi cannibalism. You know, cannibalism in the prehistoric Southwest, we don't use the word Anasazi anymore, but when I wrote the piece. So, and that was about an archaeologist named Christy Turner, who worked at Arizona State University. He was a famous archaeologist there who had done all this research. And he's died recently. But anyway, so that nonfiction piece became Thunderhead. So
It's one of my very favorite of all your books that you have written.
it's one of my favorites too. It's sort of an outlier because it doesn't. It was the first. Well, it was a Nora Kelly book before there were Nora Kelly books, and Smithback was one of the characters in it too.
Much missed Mr. Smithback.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Not sorry. No, you murdered him in cold blood.
That was Link did that. No,
He's not here to defend himself.
I
Now,
know.
come on.
yeah, I'll blame it on him anyway. But yeah, so anyway, and then there's stories about me exploring an Egyptian tomb. I don't want to tell stories that you may have already read in the book, but I went to Egypt and they discovered a new tomb in the Valley of the Kings right next to King Tut's tomb, and it was called KV5, Kings Valley 5, and I went over there and it was gigantic. It's actually one of the largest underground, maybe the largest underground tomb in Egypt, and this enormous tomb had been chiseled deep into the mountain where the Valley of the Kings is, and over 99 rooms had been discovered in this tomb. And it turned out it was the tomb of the sons of Ramses the Great, Ramses II. Now Ramses lived to be in his 90s, and so most of his sons died before he did, because this is ancient Egypt.
And his wives as well.
And his wives and everything. So he built the tomb for his sons, and he built this gigantic tomb. So while I was there, we were in the back of the tomb. It's really dangerous to be in. The ceilings had caved in. It had been robbed in antiquity, and it wasn't like some of the tombs, like King Tut's, which had not been robbed. But anyway, I suddenly had this thought. There were all these rooms that hadn't been entered. There were the doorways were still sealed with rubble. And I said to the archaeologist, Kent Weeks, I said, do you think, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be the first one in an Egyptian tomb. And all of a sudden I have this opportunity. Do you think it'd be possible if I could be the first one in one of these rooms? And he said, oh, absolutely not. And I said, please? He said, oh, all right. So in the back of the tomb, he picked out the smallest, least important looking doorway, and he ordered his workmen to clear the rubble below the lintel because there had been these cave-ins. So there was this hole. And then he said, I said, well, how am I going to get in there? There's no ladder. And he said, oh, we don't need a ladder. And he directed his workmen to pick me up and shove me head first in this hole. And I fell into the room on the other side, completely filthy. And then they put a light bulb in a cage, and a wire in after me. And I looked around, and I could hear Ken Weeks' voice outside saying, what do you see? And I said, oh my God, everywhere, the gleam of gold. And there was this silence, and then he said, get out of here, that's bull. Oh, you don't see anything. I said, you're right, the room's been robbed like all the others. I mean, there was still stuff in it, but not gold. There was broken things. So I came back out. He said, boy, you gave me the worst turn in my whole life as an archaeologist. I thought I'd just given away King Tut's discovery to some schmuck of a journalist. But it was fun. When I wrote the piece for the New Yorker, that's how I ended it. It made a very nice ending to that story. So the Lost Tomb is all the stories that I wrote involving tombs, death, burial, murder, cannibalism, the dark stories.
Does Dead Mountain come out of it?
Dead Mountain, yeah.
Right.
That was it.
Which is the most recent Nora Kelly, and I think it's just brilliant. I love it. And many of Doug Lincoln's books have shall we say, supernatural elements in them and all. Dead Mountain really doesn't. Spoiler, sorry. But you think all the way through that it must, but it actually doesn't. And it's brilliant on New Mexico. Have you read it, sir? You're nodding your head. I mean, I love that book. I think it's one of my very favorites of all your books.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That book is also based on a true story, which I can't tell you
No,
because
you'll ruin
it
it.
was an accident that occurred in the Manzano Mountains, a very, very scary accident that occurred in the Manzano Mountains, not far from where the largest repository of nuclear weapons in the world exists. In the Manzano Mountains, nuclear bombs that are, being stored there so that if in the case of a nuclear war, they're going to have reloading. They're going to be able to reload their missiles. And I mean, by the time they're reloading, we're all going to be gone anyway. But anyway, so there was an accident that was kept secret by the government for 30 years. Then finally it came out. And so the novel's
It's a
sort of
wonderful
based
book,
on that.
though, and particularly, it's a great book about New Mexico, which, I think is. And then finally, let's talk about Talking to the Ground for a minute, because do you all know Talking to the Ground? No? You don't know? All right. There's a funny story attached to that with Doug and me, because it was out of print. You want to tell that story? It was great.
No, you should tell that story. You tell it so well. You're the one who got it back in print. Yeah,
Right.
she did
So
it.
I said to Doug, because Cities of Gold is what brought Doug and me together. We've been together ever since. And I really like Cities of Gold. And then came Talking to the Ground, where Doug and his now wife, Christina, rode horses around the four corners of the Navajo reservation. I mean, they had lots of adventures, and it's a wonderful book. And anyway, it had gone out of print at the publisher, and I said to Doug, we should have this book back. Where is it? So he went, your agent tried to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
And I said, this particular publisher generally does not like to give back rights, I mean, too bad. And so the agent failed, whatever it is, and so I wrote to the publisher and I said, we could sell this book if you guys would bring it back in print. And they grudgingly finally said, okay. And so they printed some, or they were going to print some, and they said, well, how many will you want? And I said, well, how about 2,000? And they said, we were looking at 500. But anyway, they did print 2,000, and we bought them. And that was enough to keep them in print ever since. So
Yeah.
whenever Doug comes, I buy more because I want it to stay in print.
And they
I
did a
know.
beautiful, beautiful job of
It's a
printing,
really
too.
nice, it
Much-
really
yeah,
is.
Much better than the original edition, I think, just in terms of the look of it.
So what we're missing really is your book about the Camino Real.
Yeah, that book,
That was the University of New Mexico, and that's a really lovely book too, with lots of photographs. But I haven't seen it for years.
they wouldn't reprint. And the last I looked, I don't know, I went on, looked at the secondhand bookstore. It was like $400 for this book. $400.
I'm going to keep mine
And it
in my
wasn't even
library then.
signed.
Too bad.
Wasn't even signed. I've got like boxes of them in my basement.
Why don't you resurrect one and we'll bring it over here? We could do that. Anyway, if you haven't read Cities of Gold and Talking to the Ground, I think they're wonderful, and those are Doug's very early books, so I'm extremely fond of them.
Well, thank you. I mean, Barbara and I go way back. My second book, Cities of Gold, she supported. I mean, I was absolutely unknown author. And I came out here. It was in the first iteration of your bookstore, I think. You've gone through 3 iterations, haven't you?
We've been in this one since 1999, so we had 2 over on Main Street.
It was the one before the other one. I think it was, this was around 1992 or.
Yeah, it would have been the
Yeah.
first one, which was really tiny. If you remember, it's like 600 square feet. We had to go down the street. We had to gypsy up and down Main Street and, have events in the coffee shop or the used bookstore down the way because we didn't have any space.
Well, it was great because it was the best signing I had for that book. You really brought people in. People trust you. When you say, this is a good book, people believe it. And you had more people in that bookstore than any of the other signings I did, some of which I had one or two people, you know. But
It's the fate of the new author very often. So, every time I sit up here, Patrick and I were talking about it, you see the difference in the line on the floor? When we moved here in 1999, this was the back of the bookstore. Now it's the building, right? But this was the back of the bookstore where Doug and I were sitting. There was a wall right
Yeah.
across there.
wow,
And I know, we've just, kept, our first store was 600 feet, and then there was a mirror image of it next door, which was like 900 or something square feet. But I loved it, and it got to be a rhythm because since it was a mirror image, the door in the first store opened and the sales counter was on the left. And then when we moved, the door opened and the sales counter was on the right with the tiles. And people would come in and they always said, "You moved the door." And I would say, "No, we moved the store." It was so funny. It was like a rhyme.
That's
We did
funny.
for ages. "Oh, you
Yeah.
moved the door." "No, we moved the store." I mean, because it was the same
Yeah.
little building, but we outgrew it, and there was no parking. And now, of course, we had the curse of no parking over here because of the rest. If this restaurant ever burns down, you're going to know. You're going to know who the arsonist was. Definitely me to get rid of it. But anyway, how about questions? I think we've covered Doug's general work that we have here, which is exciting. Yes, ma'am.
I know you've been asked this many times before, but how do two very strong, sure of themselves writers weave their work together?
Well, that's a good question because, I've often wondered that myself because I've known quite a few writers who have tried to do this and it hasn't worked. The reason it fails is that they don't trust their partner. When Lincoln, and it really is about trust. It's about when Lincoln says to me, "Doug, this thing you've written is not working and it's got to be changed." I mean, it hurts. I get mad, I think he's an idiot for 5 minutes, but I have to believe him. That's why I have a writing partner. And the same is true when I say to Lincoln, "This chapter you've written, it just is not working. We're going to have to rethink this," or whatever. It really upsets him because, your writing is like your babies, right? They're like your children. And nobody likes to have their children criticized. And that's why it works. And another reason why it works is that we're 2,000 miles apart. So, whenever Lincoln and I used to get together, Lincoln would say, "I've got this beautiful single malt," and bring it out. And we'd have a little dram, and we'd start talking about what fine fellows we were, and we'd start complaining about this and that, and no work gets done ever. So when I'm with Lincoln, we don't get any work done. We have to be separated because even though we're partners, writing is still a solitary effort. You can't just sit in a room with somebody and write with them. Maybe somebody's been able to do that, but I don't know how.
Well, I also think the interesting thing about Doug and Lincoln's partnership is the balance of power was with Lincoln at the outset because he was Doug's editor. And I think it says a lot for the two of them that, think about it, there was a whole imbalance, and somehow you've managed to get to the point where you're on an equal footing. So, that says a lot, I think.
Yeah,
about, well,
yeah, Lincoln has.
you're right. Maybe they just drank it.
But Lincoln and I have different strengths. I think I'm stronger. Well, I don't know if I want to go into that, but anyway, I just think.
Probably watching, so I probably wouldn't if I were you.
But anyway, no, we each contribute something that the other one is deficient in, and that's really helpful. Also, we challenge each other. I find when I'm writing a solo novel, writing Extinction, you write something and you don't know if it's any good or not. You really don't know. You don't know if it's absolute garbage or if it's the greatest thing ever. Whereas with Lincoln, I know right away. He tells me. So.
But you have the other thing that's interesting is that I've read Lincoln's books because he writes his own books, and obviously I've read all of Doug's books that he writes. but the voice that when they write together, it's a different voice. It's, it's not Doug and it's not Lincoln. So there's a fusion that occurs. And, over the years, there have been partners. Like, for example, we finally learned that Dick Francis' wife, Mary, actually wrote Dick Francis. And he provided, I think, the expertise rather than, but when she died, it died, it was never the same. And there used to be a pair of spy novelists after the war, so really old spy novelists, and they wrote as Manning Coles, and they were neighbors, and one was a woman, one was a man, and I never remember which one died first, but they were some of the best spy novelists, hilarious dialogue, great concept and all. And then one of them died and the other one tried to write another book and it just completely failed.
Wow, that's really scary.
Well, yeah. I mean, you need to survive together. Work that out.
I know. Well, Lincoln does, he writes his own novels and I've written mine. And have you read any of Lincoln's novels? Yeah. He's a really good writer on his own. And I hope I'm a good writer on my own. So I don't know. That's a...
Well, it's just that you're a third, each of you is separate, but then you have a third voice, I guess is what I'm saying, which I think is great. Does anyone else have a question?
What I like about the Pendergast novel, especially in New York, I'm originally from New York.
I hear that accent. I love it.
When you write all of the descriptions of locations and the streets and everything, it's like I feel like I'm there because I know a lot of the city. When you're writing those, do you remember these, or are you there writing these locations down?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of in the beginning I remembered them because I lived in New York for years, worked at the museum. Lincoln lived in New York, but New York started to change. When we lived in New York, it was a really rough city. I mean, it was in the 1980s. It was at the height of the crack epidemic. Little West 12th Street, where we cited Eli Glynn's company, at the time was in a frightening, dangerous, completely trashed out neighborhood, the meatpacking district. But, it was just dark at night. There was no one on the streets. There's carcasses hanging under the eaves of these meatpacking houses. And now you go to Little West 12th Street and it's, these gorgeous hotels, and you've got the High Line there. You've got, all these fashionable people dripping with their latest fashions and going in and out of these chic bars, and it's like totally different. So what I'm getting to is that after a certain point, both of us realized, well, we're going to have to kind of remember that New York is different and update. So we did. I go to New York all the time. My daughter lives there. So yes, I go to places that are going to be in the books, or I go to Google Street View if I'm like, what does it look like at the corner of Mott and such? So I go and look with Google Street View and I look around and say, oh yeah, I remember that. And then we, do that. But yeah, so it's.
Right, there was you back there, ma'am.
So I'm always impressed with both yours and Link's and Jim's books about the level of science that you have in there. I mean, as a scientist doing some very familiar work, especially with wildlife and that sort of thing, I'm always impressed. Do you have a researcher or are you doing all your own research? Just doing a lot of time on Google and reading the scientific publications and stuff.
Yeah, I started out as a science journalist working at the museum, and I was writing about evolution and, paleontology and things like that, anthropology. And so I like to do my own research. A researcher will find you something that you ask for. But when I do research, I'm finding stuff that I didn't know was there, that I didn't even know I was looking for. And some of that stuff is the best stuff there is, the accidental finds that a paid researcher is going to go right past to find what you asked for and not notice. So, yeah, and I'll
researching something and find out that it's connecting so many different ways.
Yeah. So, I do.
Are you angling for a research job with Doug? Maybe you should. Right, Patrick, you have a question from the audience?
Yeah, let's see. Scott asks, when you get an idea, how do you decide if it's something you'll write on your own or with Lincoln?
Now that's a very intriguing question because I don't think anyone has asked that question before. And it's a very good question because this has been a kind of a touchy subject with Lincoln and me. Like, for example, Lincoln's first book was Utopia. And that was an idea he brought to our partnership. He said, wouldn't it be cool to have this it's like Disney World, except it's, futuristic and high tech and all the rest of it. And I said, oh God, absolutely not. I have no interest. I can't stand going to those parks, those amusement parks. I can't stand it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So he went off and wrote his own novel. And, so some of them are ideas that don't appeal to the other. But then, some of them are ideas that, like Extinction, came out of a nonfiction piece I was going to do for the New Yorker, but then I realized that every science journalist in the country was going to write about it, this colossal de-extincting the woolly mammoth. It was every science journalist is following that story. And I said, I don't really want to have to, chase after a story with 50 other people. And that's when I had the idea for the novel. And I did owe my publisher for like 5 years a novel. And if I didn't give them the novel, I was going to have to pay back a bunch of money. So, owing somebody money really sharpens the mind, focuses the mind. So I thought, I'll write this novel, I'll satisfy that debt. And as I started writing it, I was just like, wow, this idea, I couldn't believe how it just came out. It's just a really great idea.
Well, it's been likened to Michael Crichton, but it isn't really Michael Crichton. But John Sanford's new book has a premise, Toxic Prey, which is not completely unknown, but it reminded me of the Andromeda strain, because if you remember the Andromeda strain, the idea was that you might bring back, a foreign bacteria or whatever from the moon and wipe out the population of the Earth and whatever. So, it's interesting how novelists can take actual things. You're unusual in that you write science fiction. You write nonfiction and fiction equally well. That is not that easy. People who write fiction often, and people who write nonfiction can write very boring fiction. So, it's amazing to me that you can, do both so well and make them so compelling.
Well, there are a number of really good writers started out as nonfiction. Like you mentioned, John Sanford, he was started out as a newspaper reporter, and he won a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, he's really a phenomenal writer. Hemingway started as a reporter. So I think starting in nonfiction, learning, how to really research something, how to create a real world is very helpful to fiction.
In the course of 2 years, you come out with both. You were here in December with The Lost Tomb. Here you are with Extinction. Last year we had Dead Mountain. It's always a surprise with Doug, right? You're never entirely sure what he's gonna come with.
I just love writing. I feel
I know
like
you do.
I remember years ago, many, many years ago, I was a big fan of Isaac Asimov. And before the era of the computer, Asimov had an office, and he had 6 IBM Selectric typewriters in the office. And at each typewriter, he was writing a different thing. And so instead of taking paper out and putting new paper in, he just moved from one chair to the next. Those IBM Selectrics cost a fortune in those days. I worked at the museum before they put in computers. I had an IBM Selectric. I loved it, but I could never have afforded it. Thousands of dollars. It was really expensive.
You have another question over there, Pedro?
Let's see. Yes, it says, in 2017, Paramount missed with picking up the Pendergast series. Any chance for another, like Netflix, etc., picking it up? How about a limited series?
Well, good question. I think this allows me to make an announcement to this group. First of all, the problem is that Paramount owns the rights to Pendergast and all the characters in Relic, and every single Pendergast book after that. That was the way our movie contract was written. Unfortunately, we do not have that agent anymore in Hollywood. However, Paramount has said that they have no interest in doing anything with Pendergast. And this went on for years. That's like 30 years ago. 25, 30 years ago. But then, finally, suddenly, Paramount said, yes, we would like to do a television series featuring Pendergast. And I just the other day got the check, the option payment. I think it was like a week ago. So yes, they're doing something. And they're going to start. We had suggested that they start with the Cabinet of Curiosities. But they said, no, we've read through your books and we want to start with Brimstone. So.
Did they give you a reason?
No.
Well, they don't need to. But even so, but they might do something like what, Michael Connelly, where it isn't just one book, but they merge different parts of the story. Because, the whole Bosch thing is not like following. It's not true with the Lincoln Lawyer. With the Lincoln Lawyer, they're actually doing it book by book. But with Bosch, they've taken bits and pieces and,
Well, that's interesting. Maybe they will do that. I mean, they're like they're 21
exactly. There's so many of them.
Books.
Yeah.
And, there's so many stories they could draw from. And actually, that was one of the things they said, the richness. They know that if this takes off, if people, then they can go for years. With it because they've got all this material and
they can avoid all those cliffhanging endings, right? Remember the old perils of Pauline? We don't want to do that again. Yes, sir.
So then, who would be your choice to cast as Pendergast?
I knew you were going to ask that.
I could never answer that question. I don't know.
You know what he looks like to me, and it's not somebody that you would necessarily think of, but there's an English actor called Robson Green that was in, I'm trying to think, his most recent thing was the mystery, he wasn't Wire in the Blood, but the one with the minister in Cambridge. Sorry?
Was it Grantchester?
Yeah, thank you, Grantchester. He's the cop in Grantchester, and he sort of reminds me of Pendergast.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah,
wiry
he does.
and kind of
Yeah.
small, and he has, white hair, and I mean, he just reminds me of. I think of him occasionally when I see him, is that he would make a good Pendergast.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the problem that I have is that I have such a clear vision of Pendergast in my head that nobody looks like him. Nobody's like him. And I think, one of the things that we've told Paramount is, look, don't monkey with this character. Because we've got a lot of fans who like Pendergast just the way he is. So don't change him, don't make him different. Because you want to capture that audience and have them watch the show rather than have them repulsed by it and against it.
Sort of like Tom Cruise's Reacher. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a perfect example. I mean, Tom Cruise is a wonderful actor, but he's no Jack Reacher. Now, the new guy is Jack Reacher. That guy that they've cast, he's great. But so hopefully, I really don't have an answer for you. I think the answer is to find a new person who's never been seen before, who has the accent, the tall, chiseled features, the icy demeanor, the glittering eyes, very handsome with a physique, but not like a big bulked up physique, but more of that kind of really slender, strong physique that swimmers have, that kind of physique. So
Well, let's hope it comes to pass. Wouldn't that be exciting? A whole Pendergast series.
I am so dubious about this.
Well, the monster of Florence kind of did you in as far as movies go in terms of expectations. That was so hard.
It's still happening. There's still, they renew the option every year, but when they brought the Monster of Florence out when streaming started and everyone was like, oh, the Monster of Florence would make a perfect streaming series rather than a movie. And they brought it to Netflix and Hulu and Apple, and there was huge interest. Everyone bid on it. Everyone wanted it. Netflix bid and whatever. Apple bid the most, so they got it. And then Netflix said, "Oh well, it's nonfiction. We're gonna go out and make our own series anyway." So there is a series on Netflix. It's going to come out soon.
About the
Yeah,
whole.
About the monster of Florence. Taken, the only reason they did it is because they read my book, but copyright law doesn't cover. You can't copyright nonfiction, right? The monster of Florence is a true story, so they have every legal right to do it. Although it's kind of nasty. But
Well, I can see you're annoyed, but maybe Pendergast will be such a sensation it will bandage up the whole thing.
yeah,
So anyway, we probably kept everybody longer than you planned to stay. Sorry about that. This is so much fun to have a
Yeah.
nice group like this, and we didn't have to worry about crowd control and all those things. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and let's give Doug a round of applause. Yay. So I don't know that we gave out any. We didn't give out any numbers, did we? Do you have a number? All right.
all right.
Do you know
okay.
what they are? No, don't tell me what they are. I have a book to give away, which I think sounds like really fun. It's called Assassins Anonymous by Rob Hart. He's the most dangerous killer for hire in the world, and when he's attacked by an unknown assailant, he's forced on the run from New York to Singapore to London. And Rob tends to write books that are just a little bit futuristic. He's a very good writer, and he's going to come and see us in June. So I think we should give this book away. Does Sharon know how many numbers we gave out up there? 10? All right. So would you pick a number between 1 and 10?
One number between 1 and 10. 5.
Oh, look, a winner. All right. I will give you this book, and when Rob is here in June, you can bring it in, and he can sign it for you. He's a really neat writer, and I'm so glad he's coming to see us. Now that COVID's over, writers that we have really missed or not had here at all are coming back. So, want to get your book signed? All that good stuff? If you could fold up your chairs and lean them against the wall, that would be great. And ideally, line up by number.